Madeleine McCann's last 24 hours have never been recreated like this before. What if everything you've heard about the Madeleine McCann case is wrong? In the last 24 hours before her disappearance, small details may hold dark truths that no one noticed. Get ready to discover a side of this mystery that may never have been revealed before. Guardians of mystery, we all know the outcome of this story, a night that marked the world and changed a family's life forever. But today, we're not just going to reminisce about what happened. We're going to relive Madeleine McCann's last 24 hours with details you might never have connected before. Because sometimes, amidst the obvious, lie the answers no one imagined. It was May 2nd, 2007, a Wednesday like any other in the quiet Praia da Luz in southern Portugal. The day started like any other for the McCann family. Breakfast at the Ocean Club Resort, leisure moments by the pool, and the laughter of a 3-year-old girl, full of energy and innocence. But if we look closer, there were already signs that something was wrong. Small details in Madeleine's behavior, the schedules followed by the family, and even the dynamics among the adults present. Details that only today, so many years later, begin to make sense. Throughout that afternoon, Madeleine participated in activities at the resort's children's club, supervised by trained caregivers. Meanwhile, her parents, Kate and Jerry McCann, enjoyed moments of relaxation with friends, something typical on family trips. But that particular afternoon, something stood out. Madeleine mentioned a phrase to her mother that now seems prophetic. The phrase may seem simple, but to many it suggests that something was already wrong in the dynamics of that house. Was it just a common complaint from a child, or an overlooked sign that Madeleine had already noticed something the adults hadn't? As the day progressed, the McCanns continued following the routine they had established. The evening was marked by dinner with friends at the Tapas Bar, a few meters from apartment 5A. The children, including Madeleine, were put to bed in apartment 5A. For the parents, it seemed like any other night, but in reality, it was the beginning of a nightmare. Think with me. How could the McCanns imagine that, while enjoying that dinner, something so terrible could happen? Their world was about to turn upside down, and the next few hours would bring questions that would echo for decades. But the truth is that to this day, there's something in those last 24 hours that seems to slip away. A detail that's there, hidden in plain sight. And perhaps it's this that brings answers about what really happened that night. As the clock hands moved forward that night, something hung in the air, a dense silence, almost as if time itself was holding its breath. It's impossible not to wonder, did anyone else notice? A shadow in the window, a sound that shouldn't have been there, small details that could have changed everything if noticed. But at that moment, the night seemed too ordinary to raise suspicions. You know, Guardians of Mystery, it's impossible not to feel a weight in your chest when thinking about this. How many times do we catch ourselves ignoring what seems an insistent thought? What makes me uneasy is that maybe it wasn't just fate. Perhaps in that apartment, a chance to avoid the inevitable was within reach, but it went unnoticed. This idea haunts me like an unanswered question. And when they finally realized that Madeleine was no longer there, the sense of normalcy that surrounded the place evaporated, leaving only panic and doubts. But what happened between the moments of carefreeness and the awakening of that nightmare? There's a gap there, a window of time where the invisible might have left clues. And it's these clues that we will explore next, because they might hide the truth that still eludes us. At 8:30 p.m., the clock marked the beginning of a night that seemed like any other. Kate and Jerry McCann, accompanied by friends from the so-called Tapas group, headed to the restaurant for dinner. The Tapas bar was just a few meters from apartment 5A, where Madeleine and the twins were sleeping. The combination of proximity and the idea that the place was safe gave the parents the confidence to leave the children unattended. But look with me at this scene. In the heart of the apartment, the lights were off, the curtains partially closed. The only sound was the waves breaking in the distance, echoing like a reminder of the vastness and the unknown that surrounded that night. Everything seemed calm, but what bothers me the most is what we cannot see. The events happening at that exact moment, among the shadows, without anyone suspecting. The parents had arranged a rotation schedule. Every 20 or 30 minutes, one of them or a friend would go to the apartment to check on the children. It was a solution that, on the surface, seems sensible, but when we scrutinize it over time, the flaws begin to appear. Small gaps between intervals, lapses of minutes that, added up, could be enough for something terrible to happen without anyone noticing. Around 9:05 p.m., Jerry made the first visit to the apartment. He later said that everything seemed in order. The twins were asleep and Madeleine in bed was breathing deeply, like any child exhausted after a long day. He returned to the calm dinner, unaware that, at that exact moment, something could be beginning to unfold. A few minutes later, around 9:15 p.m., Jane Tanner, one of the friends in the group, reported seeing something strange. She described a man carrying a child in his arms, walking in the opposite direction of the McCann's apartment. What caught her attention the most was that the child was wearing a light pajama, similar to what Madeleine was wearing that night. But the most disturbing detail is this: at that moment, no one paid attention. Jane mentioned what she saw to the other friends, but the conversation didn't progress. It was as if something, perhaps the warmth of the night or the relaxation of the moment, had muffled the gravity of what she witnessed. At 10 p.m., it was Kate's turn to return to the apartment. She was the one who discovered that Madeleine was no longer in bed. The bedroom door, which was usually ajar, was completely open. The window as well. The gentle wind made the curtains flutter slightly, as if trying to point to something no one could ignore. And then, guardians, imagine this: the empty room, the made-up bed, but without Madeleine, and that deafening silence. The kind of silence that screams questions in your mind, makes your heart race, and your stomach churn. Kate's scream echoed through the resort. "They took her! They took her!" These words still resonate as a mark of absolute despair. Within minutes, friends, resort staff, and guests began a frantic search. Corridors, closets, gardens. Every corner was searched, but the only thing found was an overwhelming absence. Madeleine had disappeared, and no one knew how. But there's something in this initial search that leaves a bitter taste. Some questions were never answered. Why wasn't Jane Tanner's report about the man with the child taken seriously immediately? Why did it take so long to contact the local police? And above all, what happened during those intervals when the children were left alone in the apartment? What makes me uneasy is this window of time, from 9:05 p.m., when Jerry was at the apartment and saw nothing out of the ordinary, to 10 p.m., when Kate found the room empty. It's only 55 minutes. Not much, but for someone planning something meticulously, it's enough time. Who entered that room? How did they manage to take Madeleine without leaving traces? And perhaps the most distressing question, did she call for her parents at that moment? These questions continue to hover like a specter, a shadow that never dissipates. Stories like this make me think about what truly defines time. 50 minutes might seem like a blink of an eye, but they can also contain the kind of change that not only stole their daughter, it stole the notion of safety, the sense of normalcy, and left a hole that no explanation seems capable of filling. From here, we enter the darkest phase of the night, because it's at this moment that misunderstandings, contradictions, and doubts begin to transform Madeleine McCann's case into one of the greatest mysteries of our time. Between 9:05 p.m. and 10 p.m., the McCann world changed forever. But the question that won't leave my mind is, what exactly happened during that interval? A man carrying a child was seen, a window was open, and the silence of that night became deafening. These pieces have been on the board from the beginning, but it seems no one managed to connect them the right way. Was there something in plain sight that everyone simply overlooked? You know, thinking about it is unsettling. How many times do crucial things escape us because they seem too small? A shadow on the sidewalk, a strange movement in the darkness. All of this can be ignored in a moment of distraction. It's impossible not to imagine if someone that night saw something, felt something, but thinking it was nothing, let it pass. What would you do if, looking back, you realized you might hold the key to preventing a tragedy? The night had its own rhythm, slow and almost hypnotic. The lights of the tapas bar flickered in the distance while, in apartment 5A, the air seemed to freeze at a crucial point. The truth lies in that interval, between laughter and despair, between the common and the irreparable. But are we ready to face what might be hidden in that fragment of time? That's what we're going to try to unravel next. Jane Tanner observed the man carrying a child. She would later report that he was walking hurriedly, with his head down, as if he wanted to avoid being noticed. The description seemed clear: a thin man wearing simple clothes, carrying a blonde child in his arms. This seemingly banal scene had the potential to be the key to understanding the next events, but that night no one gave due attention to this report. This detail was lost for days, and what happened next only made everything more confusing. At 10 p.m., when Kate entered the apartment and saw that Madeleine was not there, the first moments of the search became chaotic. According to Jerry, he checked the main door of the apartment after his wife's alert and noticed something that left him perplexed. The door was unlocked, but that didn't make sense. They had left the apartment certain they had locked it. Here arises one of the first contradictions. The McCanns initially stated that they used the main door to leave, but also said they always locked it when leaving. However, the door was open when Jerry returned. How could this have happened? The detail of the bedroom window, partially open with the curtain fluttering in the wind, only complicated the narrative further. Could the supposed kidnapper have entered through there? But if so, why were there no signs of forced entry? Another point that fuels the mystery is that on the same night, between 9:30 p.m. and 10 p.m., a second witness, a local resident, reported seeing something unusual. He mentioned seeing a man standing near apartment 5A, leaning against a wall, discreetly observing the surroundings. This man was never identified, and the report, although consistent with what Jane Tanner saw, would only be revisited much later. These two reports, which could have been cross-referenced in the early hours of the investigation, got lost amidst the whirlwind of actions and reactions that occurred after the disappearance. Clues that, if connected that night, might have given a different direction to the search for Madeleine. As friends and resort staff began the frantic search, something curious happened. The times didn't match. The Tapas group, which claimed to be regularly monitoring the apartment, began to present slightly different versions about the exact times of the checks. Jerry said he went to the apartment at 9:05 p.m., while others in the group remembered times closer to 9:15 p.m. This discrepancy of a few minutes might seem trivial at first glance, but in a case where every second matters, it becomes a significant gap. Who was really at the apartment during that interval? And were the checks done as planned, or were there moments when attention diverted, leaving Madeleine more vulnerable than thought? One of the most intriguing points arose days later when Jerry McCann stated that he had crossed paths with Jane Tanner while she was returning to the Tapas bar, shortly before she observed the man carrying the child. But there's something strange about this detail. Jerry said he didn't see the man, although he was on the same street and within the same time frame. How can someone carrying a child in their arms go unnoticed on such a short path? This contradiction that the man described by Jane was not linked to Madeleine's disappearance, while others speculated that he could have acted so quickly and quietly that no one else noticed his presence. What really happened on that corner remains one of the great unanswered questions. Another point that caught attention was the state of the window in the room where Madeleine slept. Resort staff stated that although the window was open when Kate found it, it didn't appear damaged. There were no signs that someone forced it open to enter or exit. Additionally, investigators noted that the type of window used in the apartment was heavy and difficult to open silently, raising another doubt. Was that really the way Madeleine was taken? This inconsistency with the window brought even more uncertainties to the case. If the kidnapper entered through another place, how did they manage to do so without being noticed by the parents or nearby guests? Once again, the time interval between checks seems to harbor more questions than answers. And finally, there's a question that seems minute but carries a disturbing weight: the clocks. During testimony, several members of the Tapas group provided different times for the same events. Some marked the trip to the apartment at 9:05 p.m., others at 9:30 p.m. This lack of precision in time can be attributed to the chaos of the moment, but it also raises a question: what really happened in those confusing minutes? The first hours of the investigation were marked by a pattern that would repeat over the years: conflicting reports, clues that emerged too late, and a constant feeling that something was slipping through the cracks. But do these details that seem not to fit point to something bigger? And above all, what really happened between 9:05 p.m. and 10 p.m. in that interval where Madeleine's fate seems to have been sealed? There's something that haunts me in this case. Something small, almost invisible, but that carries an impossible weight to ignore. Think about it. An open window, an unlocked door, and a clock that never seemed to be in the same rhythm for everyone. Every detail, no matter how small, is a piece of the puzzle. But what if we're looking at them in the wrong order? And if something crucial is still hidden, exactly where no one dared to look? I always wonder what it would be like to be in that place, that night. The silence, the soft lights of the resort, the sound of the waves in the distance. It's the kind of setting that should bring peace, but now only carries question. It's almost as if the environment itself held a secret, a whisper that no one could hear. The thought that something so devastating was happening, while everything seems so normal, it tightens my heart. And then comes the detail I can't get out of my head. The contradictions in what was seen and said that night. A man carrying a child, but unnoticed by everyone. An open door that should have been closed. It's at this point that the mystery deepens. Because guardians, if these fragments of memory hold the truth, what else might they be hiding? And that's something we can only discover next. Contradictions begin to form like misaligned pieces of a puzzle. On one side, Jane Tanner's account of the man carrying a child at 9:15 p.m. On the other, Jerry McCann's testimony, who claimed he saw no one when he returned to the apartment during that same interval. This raises the first big question: how can two people pass by the same street within minutes and have such different experiences? For some investigators, the explanation was simple: memory lapses, common in moments of stress. However, Others argued that there was something deeper in this discrepancy, a detail left aside perhaps, or the possibility that not all reports were entirely honest. The man described by Jane seemed to appear out of nowhere and disappear with the same ease, carrying not just a child, but the certainty that he knew exactly what he was doing. But if he was responsible, how did he manage to enter and exit apartment 5A without being seen? This is where theories begin to diverge. One line of investigation suggested that he could have been a resort employee or someone familiar with the McCann's routine. After all, the apartment showed no signs of forced entry. This fact led many to believe that whoever took Madeleine entered through the unlocked door, something only possible if the person knew it would be open. This idea fueled one of the case's first tensions, the possibility that the McCanns themselves were, in some way, negligent. It was hard for public opinion to ignore the fact that the children were alone in the apartment, and the media was quick to exploit this angle. For the McCanns, this suspicion was an unbearable burden, but for investigators, it was a line that needed to be carefully analyzed. The role of the media also not only created a wave of indignation, but also began to influence the investigation itself. Every new theory or suspicion seemed to shape the public narrative even before the facts were confirmed. This created a direct conflict between the Portuguese police, who had their own suspicions, and the British authorities, who saw the McCanns as victims of a flawed system. Another point of conflict arose from the witnesses and inconsistencies in their testimonies. Jane Tanner, for example, took days to report in detail what she had seen, something many criticized as a crucial time loss. Additionally, other members of the Tapas group seemed to have fragmented memories about the night's chronology. Some claimed to have heard sounds in the apartment while passing by the street. Others said there was nothing unusual. These discrepancies gave rise to a second theory. What if Madeleine's disappearance wasn't a planned kidnapping? Some believed it could have been a crime of opportunity. Someone who, while passing by the apartment and noticing a half-open window or an unlocked door, acted on impulse. This would explain the lack of signs of sophisticated planning, but also left a gap. How could someone have had time to carry a child without being noticed? And then there's the theory that connects the man described by Jane Tanner to a larger network. Some parallel investigations suggested that Madeleine could have been taken as part of a child trafficking scheme, a devastating possibility that expanded the case's scope. The profile of the man Jane described, thin, simple appearance, carrying the child in his arms, seemed to align with similar reports in other minor disappearances across Europe. However, the Portuguese police never managed to confirm this connection. The searches for this man hit a wall of uncertainties. No concrete clues emerged, and the case began to resemble a web more than a linear path. While the figure of the invisible man dominated headlines, another point began to bother investigators: the bedroom window. Kate McCann stated she found the window open, but some experts argued that this was unlikely. The type of window used in the apartment was heavy and difficult to open without making noise, which suggested it might not have been used as an entry or exit point. If the window wasn't the way, the issue of the unlocked door returns to the center of the investigation. This fuels an even more controversial theory. What if Madeleine never left the apartment? Some believe the disappearance could have occurred within the room itself, perhaps by someone who was already there or who had easy access to the place. And this is where the mystery intensifies. Between 9:15 p.m., when Jane saw the man, and 10 p.m., when Kate noticed the disappearance, there's a gap of only 45 minutes. In that short interval, something devastating happened. Every detail of this time window has been exhaustively analyzed, but nothing seems to fit completely. What really happened during this period? A premeditated crime or an impulsive act? And did all the witnesses really tell the truth, or was there something still being hidden? The answers to these questions began to shape the lines of investigation that would follow in the months and years to come, but none of them would come without their own emotional and moral cost. Given everything we've analyzed, it's clear that Madeleine McCann's case is not just a personal tragedy, but also an enigma that continues to defy time and logic. The contradictions in the timings, conflicting reports, and the figure of that mysterious man create a web of questions that, to this day, have no complete answers. If there's something I've learned from this story, it's that every detail matters. The open window, the unlocked door, the witnesses' descriptions, they are pieces that seem not to fit, but together they compose the portrait of a night where everything changed. And the most distressing part is thinking that perhaps the truth is hidden in the shadows of that time window that we never managed to fully illuminate. Although there are many theories, from the involvement of criminal networks to the hypothesis of a crime of opportunity, the feeling that remains is one of emptiness. The search for Madeleine is not just an investigation, it's a reminder that that no matter how much we advance, some answers may be destined to remain in the shadows. This case makes me reflect on how humanity deals with the lack of answers. It's painful to think that, for the McCanns, each day is a battle against the unknown, an effort to keep their daughter's memory alive, and with it, the hope for an ending. But I also wonder, how many of us, in situations where small details